the hell am I doing? About 5 months ago, I made a decision that can only be described as life-changing. I went to the store and I traded in my brand new iPhone 13 for this thing. Now, if you're born after 2010, you might not know what this is. But this right here, it's a flip phone. Okay, so I was born in 2002. And during my childhood, smartphones weren't really a thing yet. Like, I remember my dad had a BlackBerry and I would play Brick Breaker on it every so often, but that was about it. Basically, when I was growing up, no one really had a smart device. So my first phone was actually a flip phone back in the 5th grade, and I wish I could tell you more about it, but I barely even remember using that thing. I remember smartphones becoming a thing really when I was in middle school. My first smartphone I got in 7th grade. It was a Nokia Lumia. Now, by today's standards, that thing was a piece of crap, but it had a bright screen and this game called Tiger Ball. I don't know if anyone knows what the hell that is, but dude, I was hooked on it. Ever since then, I've had this little screen in my pocket giving me the information of the entirety of human history, like at a moment's notice. Now, at this time around middle school, social media was starting to become a thing, right? So Vine was pretty popular, and then Instagram was just in like its beginning phases, but it was definitely gaining popularity. And ever since then, you know, social media has exploded and never really slowed down, and well, you know what the digital landscape looks like today. But essentially, ever since I've been a young adult, I've lived in a world dominated by the smartphone. Now, you probably have a whole bunch of questions right now, but the main one that I usually get is, why? Why, in a world where technology is pretty much intertwined with everything we do, would I do this to myself? Well, the answer is pretty simple. This thing, it was killing my soul. It was the first thing I'd look at when I woke up, and the last thing I'd look at before I went to bed. It filled the boring moments and even the exciting ones sometimes. Now, I'm not anti-technology or anything. I actually find new tech really cool and exciting. What I'm not a fan of is how we interact with this technology. As each day passed, I felt this kind of numbing. I was losing my ability to think, and I didn't really like that. Now, I could have went the normal route and tried to minimize phone use while still owning a smartphone. But one thing about me is I like a challenge. Now, it's been 5 months and I still have this thing. So here's what I've taken away from the experience. Now, the first real test I had after getting the flip phone happened about 1 week after I got it. And that was when I went to Coachella. And I didn't have a smartphone. I literally couldn't record anything that was happening. I couldn't post on social media. I couldn't show people how cool I was for going to Coachella. But surprisingly, the whole time I was there, I didn't even think about my phone. And honestly, that was one of the best weekends of my life. I wasn't fighting for a spot in the crowd to get a good shot of the performer. Instead, I was kind of just listening and enjoying the moment. And that was something that has carried throughout my entire 5 months with the flip phone. The big moments were much more enjoyable, but surprisingly, even the small moments became precious. For example, instead of scrolling on my phone at lunch, I'd grab it with a friend and we'd have great conversation. Even now, when I'm at the office, a lot of my coworkers are on their phone at lunch. Instead, I go on walks. When I did have a smartphone, the #1 consumption of my screen time was always messaging. And now that it's become so hard to text on this thing, the numbers have probably plummeted. I don't know exactly what the screen time use has decreased to, but I probably use my phone for less than an hour a day. Compared to the 6-7 hours I had used on my smartphone, that's an amazing improvement. You're basically stealing 5 hours back on your day. And these 5 hours can be spent doing something more intentional and meaningful than scrolling through TikTok for 4 hours. Okay, so my main concern when I first got my phone was giving up the GPS. Now, if you live in the 21st century, you know that we use our phones to literally get anywhere. And now, for context, I go to school in Los Angeles, and it is a shit show trying to use public transportation over there. So not having a phone kind of limited me in that way. But as all humans do, and what we're best at, I adapted. Now, I'm not gonna lie, a lot of that adaptation was just using my friends and having them find out where to go. But for the times where I was alone and I didn't have anyone else to rely on, I'd have to figure it out myself. And if you get lost beyond help, you can always ask a stranger. So that was another thing about getting the phone. It forces you to be a little more social, to go out of your way to talk to people when you're confused, and to ask questions when you don't know something. And in that way, it made me better with people. And that was a pretty cool unintended consequence that I got out of this whole thing. But with that, you don't have Google. And this is probably one of the main things that I missed in my daily life. When I had a question, something simple like when a store would close, I could not look it up, right? I had to kind of just figure it out, or if it was something that could wait, I'd write it down in this little notebook that I bring with me everywhere because I don't have a notes app anymore. But it was all something that I eventually just got used to. Another thing that was interesting to see was just how damn integrated phones are in our life. So obviously, the main thing I'm sacrificing here is convenience. I didn't have the bus pass on my phone. I didn't have an Apple Wallet to pay for groceries at the store. Hell, I didn't even have the app that got me into my own apartment building. But, as all humans do, I adapted. Now, the first month took some getting used to, but after that, it became normal. It's the same thing that happened when I went vegetarian. It's the same thing that happened when I moved across the country. It's a little weird at first, but you kind of just get used to it. Now, the main thing that I saw changing was just getting more things to replace the functions of things that I use every day on my iPhone. For example, I carried around this little notebook that I would write in whenever I had to take a note. Obviously, I don't have a notes app anymore on my phone, so I swapped it for something physical. Another thing that I had to replace was my camera, because this thing does take pictures, but they're really bad. And so I got a digital camera to replace that. Now I got this like cheap $20 camera on Amazon. Ended up replacing that because the battery life was 20 minutes long for a nice digital camera that cost me around $80, $90. Another thing I saw happening was that I was becoming more thoughtful. Now this book right here, this is my journal. And I had it before I got my flip phone, but I only use it a handful of times. However, since the moment I got the flip phone, I started journaling 3 times a week, which was unprecedented. I guess I had a lot more thoughts that weren't being blocked off by having a phone. Now this phone is really good at one thing: making phone calls. Who would have figured? But other than that, it's like kind of a pain to use. Texting is really hard. I'm gonna show you guys how good I got at texting on this thing. All right. Okay. Open the messages. This is a UI, by the way. Open the messages. All right. We'll say mom. She asked me if I wanted Korean food for dinner. Yeah. That sounds good, mom. Boom. I got pretty good at it. One typo, but that's too much to fix. You don't have streaming services, you don't have internet, but that's kind of the point, right? It doesn't do anything except make phone calls. Now, yes, I would find myself unbearably bored sometimes, but that isn't all a bad thing. Boredom lets you sit with your thoughts. It lets you think about things you might have not thought about if you had a distraction in your hand. And honestly, I think it's made me think more creatively. Now, I wasn't sitting at home every day alone and bored, not knowing what to do. It actually got me outside of the house more. But when I didn't have time to go out, but I still had those small moments in the day where I had nothing to do, I found myself curbing boredom with other things. One of those big ones was reading. I actually used to be a huge reader as a kid. And I would go through maybe 40 books in the summer because I loved reading that much. But like every American that goes through the education system and is force-fed to read things they don't want to, I fell out of love with it. But now that I had moments to fill, I found myself picking up books more. If I was bored, sometimes I'd work on photography. And probably the most surprising thing I did to curb my boredom was read the newspaper. Now you're probably thinking, these things still exist? Yeah, they do. And I get them delivered to my house every morning. But this thing fills my time like you wouldn't expect. On my train ride commutes, I find myself reading the newspaper. When I'm sitting down in the park at lunch, I sometimes read the newspaper. And when I'm generally bored, I'll pick up the newspaper. And despite not having a phone to constantly tell me the news, I feel more connected than ever. And after 5 months, I guess the last question standing is, will I be keeping my flip phone in 2023? And yeah, I don't see why not. Even though it's caused me a whole bunch of inconvenience and a whole bunch of weird looks on the sidewalk, I think this thing is making my life better. Even though life has been a bit less convenient, I find that I'm more productive, I'm more thoughtful and intentional, and in general, I'm happier. So I'm keeping this bad boy, and if you have any considerations or qualms about it, I suggest you at least try it. And at the end of the day, we live in such a beautiful world with so many cool things to see and so many amazing things to do. And getting rid of my smartphone has made me less distracted from all this beauty. So I'll leave you with this. Why live in a virtual world when the real one is already so beautiful? Oh, and plus it is so sick hanging up on people like this.